Hi, my name's Tracey Renelt, and I'm the Extension Dairy Field Specialist for the SDSU Extension Service. And with us today is Warren Rusche, also with the SDSU Extension Service as our Extension Beef Cow-Calf Field Specialist. Today we'd like to talk to you about proper forage hay sampling methods.
Knowing the feedstuffs' nutritional value is really the foundation of being able to utilize those feedstuffs properly in a livestock ration, that's the basis for us to balance the rations properly for the animal's nutrient requirements. It also allows us to compare feedstuffs. It gives us a basis to make some comparisons between feedstuffs so that we can compare them on an even basis. And it's also a way for us to price forages from both the buyer and the seller standpoint to make sure that they are being priced correctly based on what their nutrient values are. But all of that testing starts with having a proper sample. If we do not have a sample that adequately represents the forage that we're talking about, all of the testing is of very limited value.
So what's required? Well, we need some tools first off to take that sample properly. First on the list is a hay probe, and there are several hay probes on the market. If you are interested in purchasing a hay probe, you can go to www.foragetesting.org, which is the National Forage Testing Association website, and they have approximately about 11 different hay probe dealers listed on that site. Next, you'll need a clean bucket, followed by a sample bag, preferably a Ziploc sealable bag, about a gallon size. Along with that, you need to make a decision in your tool bag of where you're going to send your sample to. There are several testing sites out there, once again referring to the National Forage Testing Association website. They have several certified labs listed, and there are also several labs listed here in South Dakota that are available. If you are looking for a location to send your sample to, please feel free to contact us at the regional extension offices to get a listing of those local sites. Lastly on our list is a permanent marker, which you'll use to label your sample properly. On that list, as far as the hay probe, we'd like to make reference to it in that your hay probe should be a minimum of 3/8 inch in width or diameter across so that you can take an adequate size of sample. The other thing to make sure with your hay probe, since there are several in the markets, is making sure that your hay probe is sharp. The tip end is sharp so that it can take and core that bale easily with minimal effort on your part to obtain that sample. Some hay probes are available where you can attach a electric drill to them or a handheld drill to help core that sample a lot easier. Some are also hand cranked. So there are several, like we said before, on the market, but just making sure that that is going to take an adequate sample at the time you pull it with a sharp tip and that it's easy for you to use. Otherwise, you're probably not going to want to use it very often.
As we start thinking about going forward and identifying how we're going to go about sampling the hay, we need to think first about dividing that hay crop into lots. And by a forage lot, what we're talking about is those bales that come from the same field, the same cutting, that had the same amount of rain damage, if any, and or any amount of weeds, grasses, basically so that that group of bales, the sample that we take, represents that uniform group as much as possible. And any changes of that, if there was a part of the field that had some extra rain damage or got cut a little bit later or had some additional weed pressure, we need to separate those out and sample those separately and make that a separate lot so that we're adequately comparing and getting the true differences in feed value between those two areas of that field. When should we pull that sample? Ideally, we want to sample those forage lots as close to when we're going to be using or valuing those feeds as possible. If we're selling, we want to be sampling that as close to the point of sale as we can. If we're using those to be fed in our own operation, we want to be pulling those samples as close to the point of feeding. And the reason we want to do that is that way any kind of storage losses or changes over time that occurred from the time of harvest to the time of use, that sample takes those changes into account. And as Tracey mentioned before about the equipment, before we start this process, you want to make sure that those equipment is working properly, that you have everything you need, and that the tips and so forth are sharp, so that when we go out and take those samples, we have everything ready to go to make that process as simple and as seamless as possible.
So how many samples do you need to pull? Well, that often can be a point of discussion, but research has shown that you're going to want to take a minimum of about 20 cores. Now this can vary. If you're sampling, for example, small square bales, you're going to want to pull a core from each bale, or 20 bales in that lot, to obtain your 20 cores from those hay bales. Now if you're sampling large round bales, for example, you may be able to sample somewhere between 8 to 10 large round bales selected at random, but you're still going to want to pull a minimum of 20 core samples from your lot, and then obtaining about a half a pound of hay sample, which should be collected to be processed and analyzed at the labs. So as we talk about proper techniques, and we're going to go through and show you those proper techniques, on a square bale, you're going to sample at the butt end of the bale, about in the center of the bale, coring towards the center of that bale and inserting that probe at a 90-degree angle. As our probes are somewhere between 12 and 24 inches in length, you're going to try and insert it the maximum length into that bale to get as much of a sample as possible. Large round bales, also in that process, you need to sample on the curved side of the bale, making sure that you clear away also, as in the square bale, any twine, so that is not taken into the sample, or any net wrap, possibly if you have net wrap bales, before you start inserting your hay probe into that sample, also at a 90-degree angle, and then working your way towards the center of the bale. As we stated earlier, you may only be taking a total of or sampling from a total of about 8 to 10 bales, but you're still going to be pulling about 20 cores in that lot. So you may, on large round bales, you'll be sampling on both sides of that curved portion of the bale.
After you've taken the core samples, we need to mix that entire sample in a clean plastic or other kind of container, and mix that very thoroughly, and then put that sample into that 1-gallon Ziploc type bag that we mentioned earlier and seal that up. You don't want to try to divide that sample if at all possible, because then you may run the risk of altering what that composition is. The divided sample, one of them may have more greater proportional leaves, for example. Real important step then also is labeling that bag with the permanent marker, with whatever the lot name or whatever kind of notations you need to make, so that you know what that sample, what lot of hay that sample is representing in terms of forage type and variety and so forth, because it's very important to keep those track of what lot those samples come from, and not to rely on your memory, because after we take that sample, they're all going to tend to look very similar. So if you don't record that up front, you run the risk of not being able to remember what that sample is representing. And then the final step is to deliver that sample to the lab of your choice. And you want to make sure that between the time you take the sample and when the lab receives that, you want to have that stored in a clean area that's dry and out of direct sunlight, to minimize any changes that may occur in that feed's composition between the time of sampling and when the lab has the opportunity to analyze that.
So for more information on taking proper forage samples, please refer to igrow.org, or you can contact us at your local regional extension office for more information. Thank you.